I'm Richard Welsh, and I'm going to be chairing this section. We're going to look at automation of versioning. We're going to have also Henry Gu and Cédric Lejeune coming up to talk. But I'm going to kick it off talking a little bit about some of our experiences at Sundog doing this in the cloud, and just hopefully give you some little pointers as to things you can think about when you're in that kind of environment. I'm not going to talk specifically about any of our product or what it's actually doing, just generically about some of the things that we found trying to deploy this type of service to effectively speed up and reduce cost in the automation process. As you heard from Eric, there are a lot of versions coming in, or rather a lot of versions going out, so it's well into the sort of 300-400 plus on the movie now. When I was working in digital cinema mastering, gainfully employed, we were down at about 200 at that time, and when we first started doing it, it was sort of in the 50s maybe. So this number is not going down, it's going up. So there's clearly a need for automation, and depending how sophisticated you want to get with it, you can kind of build an entire pipeline for automating that versioning. It's still very manual though, largely these days, and so it's not trivial, and part of the reason for that can be put down to the source. So it would be lovely if we got IMF all the time, and if there was one flavour of IMF that we got all the time. But even with IMF at the moment, there are a lot of flavours, and not really as broadly adopted as we would like, because it would make life very easy. So if you're doing versioning, you might start with an IMF, although that's unlikely at this point, but probably in the near future that will be the case. You may well start with a DCP, so depending on where the original version of the movie was made, you might receive an OV DCP that's already JPEG 2000 compressed. That has its own challenges if you end up doing double compression, but you could be starting with that. You could start with Open Timeline I/O. Now that is, as Eric was saying earlier, really, I would say, one of the better ways to do this at the moment. And for those of you who are in the business of software and content, I would thoroughly recommend going and having a look at that and contributing to the project if you can. It's still a work in progress, but it's a very, very powerful tool. And the more adoption there is, the better it's going to get. But the truth is, if you're doing versioning right now, what you're likely to get is stuff, which is as defined. So good luck trying to do that fully automatically. It's going to be a challenge, but you can start to look at how you deal with the stuff as it comes in, and whether you can actually clean it up and make it usable to come out and send all over the world. So with that in mind, if you're going to do this in the cloud, which is I think now there are so many ways to do so many tools out there to do this, that it is very much a viable environment. You probably hear about microservices. So microservices are really the kind of components that you use to do a job in the cloud. Now, they could be embedded services, so some cloud providers like Microsoft and Amazon and Google have services that effectively run some sort of process for you as just a called service. So there's some processing going on, there's some data manipulation going on, but you don't have any software. You just give that service the source, and it creates some sort of result. So those would be things like Lambda functions in Amazon AWS, which is known as a serverless service, so you don't have to provision any compute power or anything like that. So those are embedded in the cloud environment that you are using. Then there's containerization. So that could be things like Docker or Kubernetes, and those are basically self-contained modules of software that don't need to have any specific definition about the type of compute resource that they're going to run on. They're just a self-contained bit of software, and as you call those services, you just get more and more of these Dockers or containers doing the job. They're very good for self-contained processes, so if you need to do a small task or you've got something that can run in isolation and doesn't necessarily need to know about other things going on, then you can use those very effectively for scaling. If you have a very dependent process that has a lot of kind of backwards and forwards between the information it needs to know about one process to make the other processes work correctly, you're more likely to then run internal microservices. So these would be the same effectively as a containerized service, but running in your own larger software environment in the cloud. Now, the advantage of that is you can, again, scale up and down very well. So you're only using these services when you need to, which naturally means that you're only using the compute power and therefore costing money when you need to. But the downside of that is you then have to do all of the orchestration between those microservices, and they're not necessarily going to have ready-to-go interfaces and hooks in the way something like Docker does. And then the other way to do it, the final way to do it, is monolithic, which is effectively like the finished, fully constructed engine. I would say that that is to be avoided if you're going to go and use the cloud to do anything like this, simply because at the end of the day, when you need to change something, you're having to change the whole thing. Also, I mean, it comes, one of the big challenges is security, and I will come back to that, but in a monolithic environment, if you change one small thing, the whole monolith has to be checked for security. Whereas if you have lots of microservices and you add a new one or you change one, you only need to check the security of that microservice. It's unlikely in that case to have an impact on the entire environment. So if you want to think of monolithic as just lifting up a piece of existing software that you might run on your laptop and running it in a computer that's in the cloud effectively, as if that was a local machine, that's kind of your lift and shift monolithic application. But in the cloud native is typically identified by running microservices, and it's certainly a much more agile way to build the application. So if you're going to do versioning, a really, really big challenge is storage. As you can imagine, the assets that you've got to deal with are huge, and just looking at what Eric was talking about dealing with, he had just tons of stuff that he's going to have to sort through and move around. And so one of the things that you need to do is, as the stuff is coming in, because it's typically going to be stuff at this point, and it's not going to be have nice validation built in, like IMF, you're going to have to do some validation. I mean, you would validate IMF, but it's a lot easier. So at the moment, if it's just stuff coming in, you're going to have to think about how you determine what that stuff is. Is it the right format, the right color, the right frame rate? Is it the right resolution? And how's that going to fit together with all the other components? The way we do it is we have a completely flat store when we're versioning, and we use something called C4ID. Is there hands up anyone who knows C4ID? A few of you. Okay, so C4ID, again, I thoroughly recommend go and have a look at it. It's at that little web link at the bottom, cccc.io. C4ID is a very easy way of doing a kind of modified SHA-512 checksum on the content and generating a unique identifier that is immutable. It allows you to automatically deduplicate assets. It allows you to determine if the assets get changed later by running the same hash. And you can use it to obfuscate the assets in storage as well, just as an added layer of security. The problem that we had when we did that obfuscation was we didn't know what the files were anymore, because they're just big long strings. They don't even have a file extension anymore. It's just an object with a unique ID. So how do we know what it is? Well, because we validated it, we can write all of the validation information about things like frame rate, the original file name, the color, and so on into object metadata and glue that to the object. So that blob of metadata now allows us to traverse that store very, very fast, because we don't look at the files themselves. We don't have to parse them. We don't even have to look at the headers. We can just look at the metadata and we know what we've got because we've written everything we need to know into it. So again, that's something you really think about, is how you might customize your metadata in a cloud storage environment. So Then when we want to put that content through the engine from the flat store, we have to authenticate to the storage, and then it will go away and process it. But in terms of interrogating the files in there to determine what we want and what we're going to do with it, we can just look at the object metadata, which makes things really efficient. So all this stuff is just sort of off the shelf, really. And it's definitely a very key part of doing an efficient versioning pipeline in that environment. So I'm going to talk about security. Well, no, this page isn't intentionally blank because I haven't got anything to say about security. I started to put down what I wanted to say about security, and I realised I'd have Mark Shubin up here, rugby tackling me off the stage, like the hooter wouldn't be enough. Because there's just so much to think about. I started to realise that in some ways it's not different to what you might be used to with facility security, in that you have to have layers of security. You have security around people and the building and the processes and so on. So in the cloud you still have to have layers of security, but now these layers are things like the virtual firewalls that you're using, the protection of the code base. So you have to really think about now security being written into every line of code that you have deployed in the cloud, because if there's any exposure to the outside world, that is a vulnerability. And that brings another interesting point up with security, which is, do you expose to the outside world? So there's a notion that the public cloud is effectively the open internet, and to some extent that is true, but you can ring-fence your use of a particular section of a public cloud such that it is not exposed to the internet, as it were. But that can be a challenge in itself, because if you're using some of those embedded services I was talking about earlier, for instance, key management, you have to go to a key server which lives in that public cloud in a place that is in fact in the public internet. So now you've got a little hole to go and get a key so that you can securely go and get some content from a storage location. But you may not think that that is the same as exposing yourself to the internet. So if you don't want to do that, what do you do? Well, okay, now you've got to build your own key server that lives inside an environment that, again, is not exposed to the internet, and so on. So there's too much really to articulate quickly in a presentation like this. What I just wanted to say really about security is that it is quite nuanced, but if you think about it in the same way as you think about security traditionally, it helps to just understand that it is, again, it's layered, and think about all those layers and just deal with them kind of one at a time, and it makes it a more manageable issue. But there are certainly some gotchas, which, I mean, we certainly find that we're learning new stuff every day, and I suspect most people trying to replicate what they've done traditionally in a secure production or post-production environment are finding the same thing. As you get into the cloud and you really get into the detail of it, the security is there, but it's pretty nuanced, and so there's lots to think about and be aware of. So that was what I wanted to talk about in terms of versioning, and I think Henry is up next, so he's going to give you his view on it. And what we want to do today with these talks is make sure that we leave ourselves 10 or 15 minutes at the end so that you can ask us questions, because this is really about what you guys want to know as opposed to what we want to tell you. So with that, I'll invite Henry up.
How to move to the next one? Just the control.
You got it?
Okay, I'm going to follow Richard's conversation and look at a different angle, mainly around the 3 steps we learned by doing some of this automation. And they are preparation and creation and QC. First, I'll look at overview and what's in the versioning, since this is has a big impact on the automation. And commonly, it's a format, color space. Now we saw different net level, HDR, SDR. In the in the content itself, there are video, audio, and captions, and subtitle, and time text, basically. It's as Eric just showed us vividly, those are broccolis, but most are text, newspapers, and other logos. And also we saw in the program there are national flags and also cultural preference, like broccoli and bell pepper. And in other short-term or other program, commercial is a big part. And we saw product replacement. And other is a regional censorship. And for audio, commonly is a language associated. And between the language, I believe in Pixar has, say, in Chinese have different dialogue, not just the text has a different font. And there are Chinese mainland and Taiwan and Hong Kong, they all have a different dialogue. So we have to distinguish those. Because the different video and different audio, and also the time text subtitle, it have a big impact on the font, the timing of the subtitle, and the censorship. Censorship we saw even in the US, North American broadcasters. There are sensitivity on profanity, sensitivity. When we prepare for the versioning, we look at the next level of 3 steps. One is categorizing, first one. Then after that was the indexing and the componentizing. I'm going to look into each step. And categorizing, we break down the program. The basic block is the title. Then inside the title will be what kind of release, versioning itself. Then in the type, commonly there are, say, 4 features with text list at the end. And the main title, just the program itself without text, and insert, and etc. The rest are self-explainable. Inside of the content, there are audio track, sound group, and the language labeling. And inside the image will be tracks. Some are in the reel, and like Pixar is shot-based. And inside the shot-based will be frame, individual frames. And inside the frame, sometimes we have to know the object, the position. The position related to, say, you are burning subtitle. If we add more subtitle, additional subtitle, where is the conflict? And the position of object or logo for the subtitle or for the product replacement. Then the components of this content, we separate, keep the main program. There is no text list, and text list will be different element, and insert will be different element, and head and tail. Head includes some facility has logo, and color bars, and 2 pop, etc. A lot of categorization can be done by machine. As simple, I'm going to have some example of the detect asset content. Content asset type in a separate video, audio, and time text. Most time are well labeled, sometimes are not necessary. And even further, it's not uncommon to see wrong labeling, like a bit depth, big Indian, little Indian, progressive scan or interleave scan. And the other big mix-up quite often is a video range or full range. Sometimes mixed, sometimes mislabeled. Then before we put everything into the next process, it's best to do the QC and check the integrity of the content. We don't want to run the whole process. At the end, we find out there are corruptions or other issues. And in this case, machine learning and pattern recognition help a lot. The indexing mainly is to search the content, and we are looking for the text content versus the textless content, and localized content, and edit content. And sometimes we search for shots with certain object or logo for next step. Here's the example. If we have two releases, say the English release and the French release, they are most of them are they are all identical, but the machine can identify the difference. There are one shot, they have a different text here. After identification, we will label these shots and pull out this shot and put this shot into a new location, put an organized way. One example of this output is we use English as the base. If possible, we have a neutralized version. But here, we just use the English base, and pull out the French insert as just a component, but get rid of the redundant part. And talking about package, now IMF is growing, and starting from the original plan was doing mezzanine, but I saw more and more facilities looking at archiving, say lossless archiving. And the other mass amount of content is in original after DI, the DPX, TIFF, OpenEXR, the uncompressed material. This is a little bit tricky because those are the sequences. So it has to be organized, and quite often come with a title, and come with reels, 6 reels. And then we have to break it down into shots and frame. And we saw huge amount of content in ProRes format. And that can be used as a package as well. And DCP itself is a package. And when we make a package, besides the audio, video, and the caption part, the metadata is a major part for the automation. Just like the Pixar's film log or open timeline I/O, there are existing EDLs, CPLs, and CDL, color decision list, and that's the ASC color decision list for versioning control. And the PDL is we call PDL is a pan decision list, is a pan-tail zoom, sizing control and cropping control. When you change different aspect ratio for different format, this is very helpful. And now we see more is growing is HDR, and HDR data, metadata can be static, can be dynamic as well. So that's at another level of metadata. And the processing started from your scheduling system or processing system, and the system is sent to a job submission, say where to get which title and what I'm going to do, and where to land the result. And the system talking and post the status where the job is and when will be done, and where the system, which system is available, etc. And the first step in the process, and you make a package, can be IMF and DCP or other packages. First thing is, out of this step, first thing is you register the source material. And commonly you apply EDL, and have a proprietary, say, a film log or whatever other metadata, then after you add other information, at this step, the best way is preview the composition list. You can play back the whole thing or spot check, see if its package is valid, is what we want. Then you commit the authoring, and after authoring, there will be automatic checking on the asset the package was built. When you have after you package it, you can output. Most right now is a flat file. Even for IMF, as Richard mentioned, it's not all same. Especially will make the life easier for other vendors or downstream processing. And we make a flat IMF, flat track file sent out. And inside of the master package, we have supplementals, all componentized. But when we output, we make a flat file. ProRes or other format is a single flat file most time. Every step when you touch content, we all want to check the QC. Actually, this morning, Bill Bagler mentioned since we have the master, as we prepare the content, we check master meticulously. We knew the audio and the video, every component was good. And we put insert, we check the insert as well. Then we make a new version out of that. We let a machine to do the checking, to do the comparison. So that's much easier and faster than human can do. This part, we can find out the corruptions and also if the editing error, composition error, or anything else. It will report the discrepancy. That includes the video, audio, and time text. Here is an example. The system reports there are video discrepancy. The thumbnails shows this shot. Within this shot, there are discrepancies between your new version and your master. And the report in the middle shows the location on the timeline. On the bottom is where is the whole timeline where this discrepancy is. And next one is the audio check. On the top, the first track is your source material, your master. And the second line is your new version. You can see the color match. The red color means they are identical. Sample by sample, they are identical samples. So most of release, suppose you have, say, 90% or 99% should be same, because we didn't do anything. In this case, you can see that at the beginning there is a tone, a sine wave at the beginning, and a silence afterwards. So the QC person look at it and say, yeah, that's intended. If you see other abnormality, it will show that there's a corruption or drop or something happened as well. Okay. So that's my a brief step through.
So, I'd like to invite Cédric up to give us his view, and then we'll hopefully have a few minutes for Q&A still left.
All right. I'm Cédric Lejeune. I'm the VP of Technology of the Éclair. And the other angle I will take now is to talk more about the future, potential future of versioning and opportunities in there. So, state of the art, we've been discussing quite a lot across the last couple of days about the different versions, technical versions, languages, and it's really the bane of our industry at the moment. When I come to visit studio with my little HDR thing called Éclair Color, I don't get so much love just because, oh no, not another version, you know. And yeah, at some point, we need to find tools. We need to make that better and easier. there are also obviously more technical aspects to the versioning. And then there is, I really love actually Eric's presentation about the broccoli, but there is something very personal about it. I'm French, and though I do love broccoli, and so do my son. And at some point, how far can you get into content personalization, and how far can you actually get immersed into the story and get the jokes and all of those things? So at some point, we might run into something that goes more as we do on the web. The digital world actually reads the cookies you have in your browser and adapts the content to your preferences and everything. So let's see what could be done with current technology. Also, in this concept of product placement and what you have in your browser, you might have an ad from Amazon showing you something you watched last week. Actually, it's not something new. And looking at the literature about the subject, I found out that some companies in the 19th century actually asked Jules Verne to be cited around the world in 80 days. So it's definitely not a new thing. The Lumiere brothers also had a chemicals company called Sunlight to put some of their soap packaging in their early movies. So then back in the 80s, when the VCR started to raise and people could skip the advertisement between within the movie and everything, people started to put some advertisement content within the actual content. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, I was showing Back to the Future to my kids, and I was actually shocked to see how much of product placement there was in some movies. And nowadays, we have the VOD, and again, one of the value proposition of VOD is to actually have no advertisement at all. So people will tend to put more and more advertisement within the actual content. Another trend, there was a lot of talks about that in 2014, is product replacement. We're talking about having some part of the image replaced, especially now that we have so many versions that go into so many countries. If you have the name of a bank or the name of a food product within the movie, it might not be distributed on the other side of the world. So that's something that could be replaced. And as for now, that will take a visual effects artist to replace that content or put like the billboard in this picture to change the billboard and replace it with an advertisement for another product, for a local product. So that is something that exists today. And now we have the technology to make it actually rather simple. So the challenge is we're talking about characterize what could be replaced and added, then store the information as metadata. So we have pretty much the same approach as what Eric did show with the film log, and then replace the objects automatically. As for the extraction of the information, what could be replaced? I mean, now there was the TRX on Monday, and the technology is actually rather mature. There's also Grey Meta on the innovation zone showing the integration of several AI tools available on the market. So it's not rocket science anymore. You can have all those tools to extract the information, the text, the logos, the expressions, the language. So that's something that is really, really interesting and can provide not only opportunities to characterize the content, but also opportunities to know better what could actually be replaced in your content. You might have seen this video. It's actually very funny. One guy used videos from the web and did some machine learning on them and took the challenge of replacing and of removing Mr. Cavill's mustache. And that was actually very, very interesting because on some examples, he did a very, very good job. And some shot shown side by side with the actual production where engineers spent weeks and weeks doing CG work to replace that on the actual movie. he was able to show that he could do that with just a simple PC and open source software and a couple of hours of processing. You might also have seen the same example on the face replacement of, for the Star Wars, the Carrie Fisher recreation. So the technologies to do that kind of stuff is definitely there. Auto-edit, I was talking about what happens when your browser reads your cookies and changes the content based on your profile. This is something coming from the tech blog of Netflix, where they do show that depending on the movies you have seen previously, you will be presented different versions of the movie poster. So we are talking about having, so if you have seen Serendipity and you can see the other guys. So depending on your, I would say, your mood, it will show the movie poster differently, so to attract you to see this one instead of other one. So that's something very interesting. There are also people right now doing the same, but more on the editing side, characterizing the content, the moods, and then getting a new version of the edit. That is something you might have heard of. It's already 2 years ago. IBM Watson was used to edit a horror movie trailer. So again, it's not a science project. The technology is there. So can we expect maybe color grading depending on your mood at some point? That's something that we might want to consider at some point. Another example, and the question is how far is too far? The same guys, using the same technology, they took Gal Gadot's face and again did some machine learning on videos from the web and put her face on porn movies. So now you have actually on the web collection, actually channels of porn movies with your favorite actors and actresses, faces spot on the bodies of porn actors. So it's scary. And as much as for now, as we discussed this morning, we are scared about the fact that people don't have the right color on their TV set. We might end up with that kind of technology with not having the right actor face on the movie. So that's really, really interesting. But so obviously the lawyers will deal with that in the next couple of years, but we know the technology is definitely there. So again, content marketing is really something coming from the digital and web world, but it's something that applies more and more to what we do. Again, so there are opportunities. We probably see that more and more. It's about knowing what is inside the content and then asset management, but not the asset management of the flattened movie, but really the asset management of what is inside the movie. I'm calling it the universe, and the movie meaning an artifact of the universe you have. Then you have a complete scene with objects. Obviously, in a CG environment, you have all those assets. But actually now, thanks to AI, you can actually not only identify an asset, but you can also replace it. So you actually give the same kind of flexibility as you have in a CG world. So that's really, really exciting. And automation is now possible. We've seen that. And the question then is, I mean, we talk a lot about MAM, media asset management, but it's really about media asset monetization. How do you make, in the context of a lot of movies available everywhere in all the channels, how do you make money out of that? And currently talking with ad tech companies, so advertisement technology, it's actually rather interesting to see how those guys put the way they put a video, for example, in your YouTube stream. It's really a bidding kind of thing where they look at again, the cookies you have in your browser, give the profile to companies that can that can provide videos and advertisement, and then pretty much on the fly, the video is inserted in your stream based on your profile. So all those things now could be put directly within the content. All right, thank you very much.
Great. So we've got 8 minutes until Shubin time. So let's see if we've got any questions from the audience. I had a couple of questions. Henry's localization, I noticed, the French version of Tech Retreat was vacation. Is that the case that the French consider this a holiday?
De vacances. You actually mentioned that HPA is a problem in the UK because people don't want to pay vacation to engineers and beers, you know?
Yeah.
No, it's not quite that.
So that's an accurate translation.
Not so much, no.
So you did touch on quite a lot of it there, and we had Henry Cavill with very little in the way of a top lip, but no moustache. Do you think there's a lot of other areas of machine learning and AI that are going to impact the versioning process? Are there ways we can make it more efficient, as well as like changing the content, but in terms of use as part of the automation?
Well, certainly. I mean, a lot of what Eric described is rather easy in a CG environment, but quite difficult and costly with live action. Whether with that kind of technology, we can make it pretty much as simple in live as it is in CG. So that brings a lot of opportunities to better connect with the audiences, and I believe it's a strong opportunity.
And Henry, do you see any areas that you think AI is going to impact us in the near future with versioning and automation?
For the...
well, rather than, like, for instance, could we use AI to QC the content?
It definitely help a lot, yeah. Also I think the object search has been using for years, different field, but not in the media industry. Can be applied.
Okay. Have we got any questions in the audience? No. So all experts already. They're still reeling from Eric's presentation. Oh, we've got one.
So with the IMF data, are you going to expose that further down the chain? Because you could get to the stage where the number of versions that you have is the number of viewers that you have.
Yeah, it's pretty much the concept of dynamics, CPLs, and that's exactly what the web does now when they provide content. All the content you see in your browser is made especially for you. So, I mean, how much do we want that? On what kind of content do we want that? It's an open question, but certainly it's at some point it's already the case, you know, in the contract between the producer and the distributor. What happens? You know, how far can they go into versioning and all that? There is discussion about the artistic intent and integrity. That's a good question, but the technology is there to make that happen. Definitely, yes.
Playlist per viewer. There you go. That's the end game. Or game over, whichever way you want to look at it. Have we got any more questions from the audience? No? Okay, well, in that case, I think we'll give you 3 minutes back for the next presenter. There we go. Thank you very much.